All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely excited about this next guest here. You know, I'm a big race guy. I'm a racing fan now, man. I told you, man, ever since the coronavirus thing happened and sports stopped, I got into racing. And when we talk racing, man, we got this guy right here. You name it, he's raced it. He's done IndyCar. He's done NASCAR. He's done Truck Series. I mean, whatever series it is, he's been driven in it. He's a bad man. He was also the first African American to have tested a Formula One car and racing the Indianapolis 500. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Willy T. Ribbs.
Hello, gentlemen. Hello from Texas.
I like it. Man, first off, how have you been handling everything right now, man? Obviously, this COVID thing is crazy. You been staying safe out there?
Yeah, well, I live out on a ranch, so there's not, you don't have to put a mask on.
I like it.
And the only thing that's looking at you are squirrel and deer.
Hey, socially distancing. I like it, man. The best way to do it.
Yeah, no, it's been no problem. You just follow the rules and, be smart as you can.
Absolutely. Now, just tell me a little bit, man, to start out. How did you even get introduced to racing? And when did you know you wanted to make a career of it?
Wait a minute. You haven't seen the movie Uppity yet?
Oh, well, I've seen it, but I don't know if all my listeners and viewers have. That's the only thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, okay. I was.
Well, I was about to say, first off, Uppity is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. First off, Uppity was dope. We were actually talking about it before you came on. But like I said, for the listeners who haven't seen it or the viewers who haven't seen it, we wanted to give them a chance to let you tell it.
I grew up in racing. My dad raced as a hobby. The family business was very successful, so he could afford to buy race cars and travel around the country competing. Now, he didn't do it as a pro. He did it as an amateur because, the family business took up, all his time. So that was my introduction to racing, traveling with my dad and growing up in it, because he was actually racing before I was born on motorcycles. And then once I was born, he, and got a little older, he moved to race cars. So that was my introduction to the sport and my introduction to my career.
I like that. And now, when we talk about your career, when it started out, I mean, obviously you had your big beginning with Formula Atlantic. For the people that don't know, that's the equivalent of the Indy cars, which you see in Formula One racing. So just talk about, why did you start with the Indy cars versus the traditional stock cars?
I wasn't interested in stock car racing mainly because it was NASCAR, and I knew the history of NASCAR and the treatment that Wendell Scott received, which was absolutely horrible. And so I wasn't interested in stock car racing. What I was interested in was Formula One. And I knew that in order to be a Formula One driver, you had to go to England and or Europe to start your career. So I, right out of pretty much a year after high school, 2 years after high school, I went to England and lived in London, won my first championship in England in the Formula Ford Championship, it's a smaller formula than, it's a junior formula. It's like, it would be like in baseball, it would be like, Little League or
like the minors and stuff.
Yeah, minor leagues. That's correct. So that's where I started, and I did real well. And I wanted to stay over there in England, and eventually go to Formula One. But the family, they informed me that I had to come back home because I had some sisters and brothers that had to go to college, and they weren't going to let me spend up their college money.
Now, I have a question about Muhammad Ali. It was mentioned in the documentary that you guys had a relationship, but I was reading online that there was an interesting story behind how you guys met. Would you be able to talk about that story? It had to do with running, and then just, I guess, how your relationship evolved from then, and what kind of lessons you've learned, and what type of lessons you like to share with people from Ali.
Well, I mean, first of all, Ali was probably a greater human being and great and had great character than he was a fighter. He was a very, very determined, very strong, courageous, true to his word, and that to me was bigger than his talent as a boxer. He was just an incredible human being in terms of just his stature and his will and his principles. Okay, he wouldn't sell out. He wouldn't keep quiet because he was worried about losing money or losing commercial value. He spoke up when it needed to be spoke up, and he believed in right and wrong. And the way we met, I was racing over there, and a British journalist called me and said that Muhammad Ali was coming to London, and we'd like to get a picture of you and him together. So I knew he was at the London Hilton. They told me he was staying at the London Hilton. So I also knew that he ran every morning at 6 a.m. So I waited up. I went into London, went to Jazz Club and hung out all night. And then I went back to his hotel and waited in the lobby for a couple hours. I got it to the hotel about 4 a.m. And sure enough, at 6 o'clock on the dot, the elevator opened and he walked out in a tracksuit.
Wow.
And and no one with him, just by himself. And the lobby was empty. I was sitting there, and so I got up as he walked past me. He didn't even look at me. He walked past me, and I said to him, "Could I run with you?" He said, "No." I said, well, I waited up all night to run with you. You shouldn't have done that. I said, well, I did. And so he said, okay, but run behind me. So I ran behind for about first 10 minutes. He didn't say anything. And then he looked back as we were running. He says, what's the black boy over here doing over here from America? I said, well, I drive race cars, and that's why I'm here. You don't drive race cars? Nobody black drives race cars, especially over here. I said, this one is, and I'm winning. So he says, you ever get scared? And I said, you ever get scared of Joe Frazier? He stopped. I'll knock you out right here in Hyde Park. And he started laughing, and we kept running. And after we ran, it was about half an hour. We walked back to the hotel, and he says, and I was done. I didn't think there was going to be any more. The media wasn't there. So he said, you hungry? I said, yes, sir. Well, come up and have breakfast. That was it. That's how it started.
Wow. I like the determination, though, man. Waiting up all night, getting there and going on a run with them. Major respect. Now, you had a very unique initial introduction to NASCAR in the 1978 year that didn't necessarily go as planned. But after that, you still decided to come back and give NASCAR another go in 1986. So can you just talk about what went into the thought process of coming back to do that?
Well, in 1978, I was at Talladega, and it was the first NASCAR race I'd ever been to. And I was actually brought to the track by a former driver who wanted to introduce me to the other drivers and introduce me to people. And when I got there, people were spitting around my feet. They were just literally walking by and spitting, I don't know, a couple of feet from where I was standing. And I made it clear that wasn't going to fly. So I made some statements that they didn't like. And so that ended it. I didn't race. They didn't like me. I was tagged uppity. That's where the term came from. So in 1986, that's after I was dominating Trans Am and I was winning nearly every race I was in. I got invited by a team to come back and run in 86. And the team, as soon as I came on the team, the sponsor left.
Oh, man.
The sponsor left. And so the owner, who was a wealthy guy, but not enough to run a full season, we ran 3 races. The team ran out of money and ran out of engines. And our engines were, they were mysteriously blowing up after 3 laps.
Jeez.
So mysteriously. And so I only did 3 races in NASCAR Winston Cup. And then I, came back and back and raced a different championship and kept winning.
Now and that was the thing too. When you watch Uppity, you can see where you're talking about some of the cars and just the funding versus, the bigger, I guess, manufacturers and what do you even call them? Like the Roches and the Ford plants, stuff like that, where you didn't necessarily have the most money behind your teams, but you were still able to hang with and beat a lot of these guys. So I always thought that was impressive. But
well, when I raced for Roush in Trans Am and I raced for Dan Gurney and IMSA, I won, right? I won. And I won consistently. But that's when I was with teams on a level playing field.
Right.
And, there's a saying in racing, if your competitor has 1,000 components and you have 999, you're at a disadvantage. That's how, especially at the top level. And when I came into IndyCar, Bill Cosby was my sponsor. Bill put up all the money. Bill didn't even like racing. He didn't want to go. Only time he watched it is when I was racing. But he put up the money, but it wasn't nearly the money that we needed to compete on a level playing field. And the corporate sponsors in the sport, the sponsors of auto racing did not support us at all.
Now, how difficult was that for you adjusting? Because I know you talked about doing the Indy car and the stock cars. I mean, almost back to back, it seemed like, between those years and stuff. So how difficult was that for you to adjust between the two cars?
It's easy. I mean, if you look at the great drivers from the past, whether it was Mario Andretti or Bobby Unser or AJ Foyt, they could drive anything. That's what I wanted to be capable of doing, whether it was driving on a Formula One car, driving a Trans Am car, driving an Indy car, driving a stock car. The great drivers could win in anything. You just make adjustments. I mean, driving a Formula One car is like, for example, slow dancing with Twiggy as opposed to slow dancing with Oprah, which is a stock car, right?
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
I got what you're saying, though. Yeah, we got what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not being disrespectful. It's just one is heavier than the other, and one takes and they take 2 different types of techniques.
Right.
So, the Formula One is very light and fast and responds real quick. The stock car is heavier and slower and doesn't respond as fast.
Well, I would say this, man, something that I found very impressive of where you were talking, I think it was on Uppity, you were saying how it was times where you were coming to the race and you hadn't even tried your car or test drove your car at all. And literally the guy drives your car up, you hop in and you race. Like, when you talk about a good driver or a great driver just being able to just show up and drive whatever and compete at a high level, I thought that right there was absolute, the perfect example of that.
Well, I pretty much could win in anything, and I proved that over and over. But to win, no matter what you're driving, you've got to have the best engineers, the best mechanics, the best R&D program, the best aerodynamic program, the best shock. You've got to have the best everything, and not just engines and car, but personnel. You know, and all the teams hire the best engineers and the best tech guys that are available. I didn't have that at the top level. I had it at the medium level, but not at the top level.
I wanted to ask you about pressure, and I wanted to reference two examples. One, you mentioned earlier, whenever you went over to England when you were younger, you had your parents' college money on the line. I guess you were just young, just trying to get into this career, and it was like your dream. So like you were really putting everything out there, and I'm sure there was a lot of pressure trying to win out there and prove that your dream was valid. And then fast forward to the IndyCar qualification. It was the first one in the 90s that you qualified for. You made it on your last try. So I'm sure there was so much pressure going into that final qualification. And I know your times weren't up to par for all the other qualification attempts. Can you talk about just dealing with pressure? I mean, those are two instances. I'm sure there's many other instances throughout your career. How are you able to deal with pressure so well? Where did that come from?
Oh, my grandfather kicking my butt on the ramp. I mean, he had a lot of. You had to perform when you worked for him, and not just do it, but you had to do it well. And I always felt that I did better when I was so-called under pressure. I didn't really consider it pressure. I considered it sort of a challenge. And I regarded it as a challenge, not pressure. So I always did better, and because it kept me razor focused. And the thing about qualifying for the Indy 500, and you know, we weren't that year. And when people watch the film Uppity on Netflix, they'll see that, you know, I didn't get a lot of track time because we were having engine failures. We were having rod bolt problems. And so I didn't get a lot of practice. And Indy is a very dangerous place. As a matter of fact, with the exception of the Isle of Man, and the Isle of Man is in Ireland, and it's a motorcycle race across country. Indy is the second most dangerous place on the planet. It's killed a lot of drivers, and you have to you hang it out there, but you have to be smart because a lot of drivers have died there trying to qualify for the race. A lot of drivers have died during the race, and it's a place that you want to be smart, but you know you have to take a risk. There's a risk involved, and you've got to take it to be in the show. At that time in 1991, when I qualified, I bumped Tom Sneva. Tom Sneva had won the Indy 500. I bumped him out, and there was 60 cars trying to qualify for 33 spots. Everybody's hanging it out, and so you know the risk, but you also you must be smart.
Now, just going back, talking a little bit about, you know, you being an African-American driver in NASCAR during a time where that probably wasn't the easiest thing to be. What's your perspective on Bubba Wallace and everything that's been surrounding him currently with NASCAR?
Well, in regards to the Confederate flag, Bubba was being used as a sacrificial lamb. And the reason I say that is it was in the news that Bubba asked NASCAR to disallow Confederate flags in the infield, because if anyone goes to a NASCAR race and they look into the infield with all the RVs and trailers and motorhomes, they'll see Confederate flags everywhere. It's the only sport in the world that flies Confederate flags in the parking lot in the infield. And so after George Floyd was murdered, and let's put it this way, if George Floyd was still alive, those flags would still be flying. So it wasn't because NASCAR had seen an awakening. they saw what was happening, and Bubba, apparently the word came out that Bubba asked NASCAR to disallow the Confederate flag. NASCAR does not respond to Bubba Wallace or any other driver. NASCAR does not respond to any team owners. NASCAR does what NASCAR wants to do. Bubba Wallace is without question the sacrificial lamb, and you can see by everything that's all the repercussions, including the president of the United States a couple days ago. He's under attack. They're not attacking NASCAR.
Correct.
They're attacking Bubba Wallace. I knew it right from the beginning what was going to happen, and I said it to the media. So, he's going to have to, weather the storm. Then the Newsgate came out, and apparently there was a rope hanging around. Rope was hanging around his pit, right?
It's crazy.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, I wouldn't have, and see that when I did NASCAR, none of that happened with me. And in fact, nobody ever got in my face at all, because they knew what the repercussions were going to be. They absolutely knew that Willy T does not turn the other cheek, and he will he'll have you eating your dinner out of a straw for 2 weeks.
And this is very documented. No lies are being told. Just put it out there for the listeners. No lies are told right here. Undefeated.
Yeah, that was and my cousin Donnie, who used to play for the Cincinnati Bengals, who was tight end. Donnie's a big guy. He was about 6'5", and Donnie traveled everywhere with me, everywhere. And he wore a big black cowboy hat, and we didn't have problems. We even went into country bars, playing country music, and we had no problems there either. So, it was, and consequently, the uppity tag just got bigger and bigger and bigger. But, in regards to Wallace, I hope he's tough enough to handle it, because he's going to be tested over and over and over.
Now, I wanted to transition back to your career a little bit. Now, there were some points where you were going back in between certain racing leagues where you would go and drive vans for your dad's company back home. And can you just talk about what was going on through your mind then, where you're not racing anymore and maybe your dream seems a little bit far-fetched? Were you still thinking it was possible? Like, how big of a low point was that for you, and how were you able to, I guess, mentally get out of that?
Number one, I knew I could win. I had been winning, right? So one thing I learned from Muhammad Ali, and Ali would talk to me about his 3-year layoff, or 3.5 years. He reminded me that you don't lose talent, even if you're laid off. The only thing you can lose is your confidence. And he was emphatic about staying confident, and not giving up, never thinking it's not going to happen. and I knew that age was on my side, and so I stayed in good physical condition. I was at the right age where I wasn't losing my depth perception. Eyesight is very important when you're driving fast, and so my depth perception was good. My reflex speed was good. My feel was, that was, and that wasn't going away. And Ali was, very, very emphatic about never lose your edge, never doubt yourself that it won't happen. And I didn't.
Even whenever you were riding the vans, whenever you were out of the leagues, like that's pretty impressive to me. Like
Absolutely.
that's, where things could maybe seem far off, that you're not participating in what your dream is. That's pretty awesome.
Well, I wore a lot of tires out on the van. I mean, I was driving the hell out of them, my dad's vans, but I didn't. I didn't doubt that it wasn't going to happen. So, but as I was saying, when I was in a layoff situation not at my doing, but the industry was not kind to Willy T. Rips, and not on any level, not on the NASCAR level, not on the IndyCar level. They weren't even knowing that I could win. It didn't matter. So when I was not racing and I didn't have a deal, or I didn't have a sponsor, I wore out my dad's van. He was doing new tires every 10,000 miles.
No, that's awesome. I wanted to say this real quick. I don't know if you wanted to respond or anything, but from watching Uppity, I was so impressed at the end, just like you were mentioning throughout your previous answer, how you didn't give up throughout the whole thing. And it really was just a cool ending to see you qualify for the Indy 500. I know that was your goal at the beginning. It was just a really cool story. So I just wanted to give kudos to you there. And I think, just that whole never giving up attitude was just awesome to see.
It's funny. The response I've gotten, I mean, the last response was from Sean Penn a few days ago. Sean Penn tweeted it out everywhere, said it's one of the best films he'd ever seen. And I've gotten responses from entertainers, and Mashallah Ali, he called and said he wants to make a movie out of it.
Nice.
Yeah. So there's the response has been overwhelming and appreciated, but half the response has been from people who never watched racing. A lot of young kids who messaged me and said, I have no reason not to succeed after watching your film.
Mm.
Yeah.
That threw me. And 14-year-olds from Singapore messaging me, saying that they will always never quit.
Man, that's awesome, man. And like you said, anybody that hasn't seen it yet, we definitely encourage you to go check it out. Now, something that, like I said, is in the film, but we definitely want you to talk about it before, like I said, because the people here, not everybody has had a chance to check it out. But just talk about, man, what it meant to you being the first African American to qualify for the Indianapolis 500, and ultimately, man, what that meant to you.
I'm going to tell you, I get asked that a lot. I didn't care about being the first African American. I did not. I wanted to. I wanted to be in that race, which was the biggest race on the planet, and I'm sure anyone that play. You guys are footballers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You didn't care whether you're the first African American Super Bowl. All you wanted to do was play, or the first, or the thousandth, or that didn't matter.
Just trying to get in there. Let me do it.
You wanted to be in the Super Bowl, And that was my approach, has always been my approach to driving a racing car. I want to win. And that's all that mattered. And, go into, of course, the sports journalists and historians and people who document social achievement, they made it a big deal because it had never happened before. That was the 75th running of the Indy 500, 75 years, right? And it never happened. So it was more important to them than it was to me. Now, looking back on it now, and when in hindsight, I look back and say, wow, it was really tough to get there. And it was tough to get there just because I was African American. So I view it as, okay, because I dealt with so many obstacles to get there and to succeed. From that standpoint, I didn't quit. There was a reason they were fighting me, and I'm happy that I didn't quit because of that reason, if you understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And now, being that you've driven and raced, I mean, not even driven, but just you've raced your stock cars, your Indy cars, your trucks. I mean, like I said, you name it, you've raced it. Which one of those were your favorite to race and why? I
had no favorites. Whatever I could win in. I mean, it wouldn't matter if it was a go-kart. If whatever I was raced and won in, I liked it. It did not matter. A lot of people ask me, what kind of car do you drive? Do you drive a Ferrari or a Corvette or?
I mean, that is a good question. You in Texas is flat. What do you drive? Now that we're thinking about it.
A truck. Okay, a truck. And to go out to dinner, my wife has got the high performance car. She's got a new 550i twin turbo Beamer.
Okay.
Okay. That's what my wife drives. I drive a Lincoln Town car.
Wow. Luxury.
Okay. Or the truck, because there's no way you can, no matter what you drive, that it's going to duplicate a race car. For one, you can't drive it on the street 200 miles per hour. You can't go around corners at 150 or 200 miles per hour. You just can't do it. So I always treated automobiles, and I've never been in love with a car. I've been asked that. What was your favorite car of all time? I said, I love women. I've fallen in love with women, not cars. I never had a favorite.
I like it. See, that's good right there, man. Because I'm sure, like you said, a lot of people, they don't know that. They assume that, hey, man, you had success in Indy. All right, well, he's an Indy car driver. He has success as a truck driver. He's a truck driver. That's what he likes. But that's interesting, man. And like you said, there is nothing that can ever compare to, driving 200 miles an hour. I think about just driving 80 miles an hour and what that feels like. I'm like, 200, jeez. And you're going around curves. This is out of control.
Well, you really know, you're a race driver when you're driving around a corner 200 miles per hour. Okay, anybody can drive actually 200 miles per hour in a straight line. You can do it. It's not hard. But once you get to that corner, that's when you know how big your girts are. You'll know either way.
I like it. So before we let you go, we always ask our guests, we talk to NFL players and we have what you call your welcome to the NFL moment, that moment where you finally knew you made it, right? So for you, man, just talk about your welcome to professional racing moment, that moment throughout your career where you were like, this is it, whether it was good or bad.
Probably my first IndyCar race, which was the Long Beach Grand Prix. When once, I was there. I was racing against the best on the planet. You guys have at your league, your NFL is the biggest thing on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
You were there competing against the best. Well, same thing. My first race, my first IndyCar race, when you're introduced to, and they do driver introduction, okay, it all paid off.
I like
it all paid off. All the hard work paid off.
That's sweet, man.
Yeah, that's awesome, sweet. Man. No, we appreciate it.
Hey, well, Willie, man, we definitely appreciate you again for taking some time to hop on the podcast with us. And like you said, man, anyone that hasn't seen Uppity yet, man, definitely check it out. It's moving. It's inspirational. It's just an awesome watch, man. So like I said, man, thank you again for taking some time out to hop on the podcast with us.
Yeah, anytime. And you're on the red phone, so that red phone's 24/7.
Oh, well, we appreciate that then.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Well, have a great rest of the day.
Yep. All right.
You as well.
All right. Bye.